Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are.
We are the Classic Gaming Brothers. You know what we're doing today?
What are we doing today?
We're being classic and not classy.
Ooh.
Because we're always classic.
Always classic, sometimes classy.
Sometimes classy.
What a throwback.
Well, I know. What a throwback. We should put it on a shirt.
That'd be fun. We could sell shirts again. We still have shirts for sale, I guess.
We've never stopped selling shirts. People just don't buy them. So
I do know for a fact that someone once bought a mug and it ended up in Goodwill.
And I'm okay with that.
Me too.
It wasn't my mug.
Well, I know our dad also bought a mug, so maybe it was Dad.
Yeah. What I like is that we got a fan because of it.
Yeah, we did. We did, which is, you know what, more than we can ask for.
So if you're listening to this because you found a mug at a flea market or whatever you purchased your mug, hello.
And if you're listening to this and you gave away a mug to a flea market or a Goodwill or wherever you left it, we still love you.
Yeah, we don't care. You could.
It's not like you had to refund it.
Yeah, once it goes into my pocket, it doesn't come out.
You could buy our mugs and just throw them at the ground for all I care. And
we promise to deliver them to you intact.
That's right. They will be intact upon their arrival. And then you can do what you wish with them. Anyway, Seth. What have you been recently playing?
Recently, I've been playing a game that is not so recent, but it is relatively recent. It's actually 10 years old.
Oh, it's perfectly retro.
Perfectly retro. Just hit the retro by definition as a classic game. And it's relevant for something in the future. So I've been playing Hitman 2016, which was developed and published by IO Interactive. And you play as Agent 47, and you go through some various different maps, and you kill people, which you were hired to do. Hitman 2016 was the start of the Hitman series after the horrible Hitman Absolution, which was the restart of the Hitman series after the really good Blood Money game. So like there's like classic Hitman, which is like Hitman 1, 2, Blood Money. I don't think there's a Hitman 3, is it? Or is just Hitman Blood Money called Hitman?
Contracts was between Silent Assassin and...
Oh, yeah. Codename 47, Hitman 2, Silent Assassin. Then they dropped the numbering. I like that they, arguably made Hitman 3, when they did Contracts, but they just dropped the number. Then they brought the number back when they did the relaunch. Well, anyway, I bring up Hitman 2016, which you could actually play 2016 in Hitman 3's because they redid the engine, so you can play the older missions in the newer game, or you can just play the older missions in the older game. But I was playing the original 2016 Hitman game, not even in the new Hitman 3 environment, because I will be going on a podcast to talk about Hitman. That's not this one. I will be on the Still Loading podcast with our friend of the show, Josh. And so we'll be chatting, me and him, we'll be just chatting about Hitman. I believe Zach has a episode that he'll also be on the Still Loading podcast in the future.
Yeah, Josh asked me on for something.
So what I will say is that if you have a chance, go check out the Still Loading podcast. And in an episode in the future, if it's not out by the time you listen to this, there's an episode with me and Josh talking about Hitman. I'm apparently, according to my brother, a Hitman specialist, mostly because I've just played all the games at least once, and have beaten all the games except for Absolution, which I've only played and never beaten. Maybe I should go back and no. I think about going back and playing Absolution, then I just know that that's not a good decision. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about Hitman 2016, so I've been playing it recently to kind of get up to speed and make sure that I'm familiar with what Hitman we're talking about, because a lot of the Hitman levels kind of blend together, especially in the later Hitman games. I literally opened Hitman 2016 and I didn't know. I was like, oh, these are the levels that are in this game? There is Marrakesh, which always makes me happy because they're always like Marrakesh, and that's always fun. But I've been playing the first level, which is the runway in Paris. There's a runway and you have to kill the guy who runs the runway and then a lady who's running an auction upstairs.
Yeah, that one's real good.
Yeah, so I killed the guy. I became a bodyguard, dressed up as a bodyguard, and then I went to the guy who's associated with some sort of KGB or had some information who was coming to visit him, and then I was like, oh, we need to go to the meeting spot now. And then he met up with the guy who was the target in a gazebo, and I just stood there blending in, which, to be fair, I did not look like a bodyguard that was hired by anybody, but nobody said anything. And then the target wandered off by himself to a balcony overlooking a cliff.
Did you give him a little pushy push?
Hitman, as a professional, first cracked his neck.
And then give him a little pushy push.
And then pushed him in. So he confirmed the kill.
Yes.
And then pushed him in. And then I went into the house and I went upstairs and found a dongle that you could plug into a laptop. And there was apparently a laptop that ran the entire auction. And so then I plugged in the dongle, and that made the associate freak out and just leave because she couldn't get it figured out, and she knew she just couldn't handle it anymore, so she left. And then I started just turning off the auction, causing the person who's running it to come in because the associate wasn't fixing it because she had left, and then just privately killed her in that room. It's a fun game. I like Hitman. I like it's like a puzzle game, but with violence.
One of the last times I played, I had a mission where I was at a hotel, and I had a case that I like to call I should really learn how to lock the door, because I went into a hotel room. I knocked out one of the cleaning people so I could take their outfit. As I was knocking them out, someone walked in the door, so I shot that person and dragged their body in. And as I was dragging the body in, someone else just walked in, so I shot that person and I dragged that body in. And then I had like a pile of like 4 or 5 bodies in this room, and I was just like, all right, this is how I'm doing this. I guess I'm the only staff member working today.
Yeah, I had one game where there was like I could not get the door closed because some body was like clipped in, and so then there was just like 17 bodies just piled up in front of this one door because I was just like, I can't get everybody in. It was just a pile of bodies. So that's Hitman 2016, and check out the Still Loading podcast, hosted by our friend of the show, Josh.
Yeah, great show. Great guy.
Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Recently, Seth, I was exploring itch.io, and I found a ZZT game. And that ZZT game was called Wordles of ZZT. It was built by Dr. Doss in 2022, and it was released on April 1st, 2022. It is, in fact, an April Fool's Day joke, and sure enough, it is the game Wordle, as in the New York Times-owned puzzle game that swept the nation in 2022 or so, built into ZZT, everyone's favorite ANSI adventure game engine. And I played through it a bit. I did not guess the word. I don't think it even tells you the word if you don't guess it. And true to form, after I couldn't guess the word, you have to wait 24 real hours before you can play the next word, unless you cheat. There is a cheat in the game that you can use to skip to the next word, but I didn't know that, so I promptly closed the game because I was done with it. But yeah, after 24 hours, if you boot back in, it has a little bit of fancy code that is able to determine the time thanks to your system clock and the emulator you're using, and it will reset the word for you. It's a fairly neat way of utilizing the ZZT engine for a joke, largely because ZZT is really not the type of engine that should be used to build word-based puzzle games, considering it doesn't use letters for the keyboard input, because the only keys it uses are the arrow keys and like 2 or 3 letters for interactions with items. It doesn't have direct keyboard input though, so you can't type a word into Wordle. What you have to do is you have to move your character. They have a QWERTY layout on the screen, and you move your character to each letter.
The little blue man?
The little blue smiley face. You move it to each letter, push into that letter, and it will populate the area on the screen. It was goofy. It's fun. It was done as a joke, and you can tell it was done as a joke, but I think it was done by someone who has a lot of love for ZZT, and I think they even put out like a document describing just how they tweaked the engine a bit to get it to do the things it does. So that's Wordles of ZZT. It is a free game you can download from itch.io by Dr. Doss. It's actually playable in browser thanks to the emulators that are out there, though if you want you can always download a copy and play it on DOSBox.
Yeah, and if you are curious about ZZT is an acronym that doesn't stand for anything. It's literally just ZZT. It was designed by Tim Sweeney, the same person who is the CEO of Epic Games. It was built by and designed by him, and he originally named it ZZT so it would show up last in lists, so that if you sorted descending downwards, it would show up first. And also, the Classic Gaming Brothers did an episode on ZZT back on episode 64.
Yeah.
So if you want to go back in the time machine and go back 250 some odd episodes, you can find an episode 64 available on all streaming platforms and hosted by your favorite brothers, Classic Gaming Brothers. And you can listen to our take on ZZT where we talk about it. Who knows if the episode's any good? Probably not. But anyway, let's get on to this episode.
Yeah, I guess
I do have some things about this episode too, so we get to it.
Oh, okay. Is it separate from my notes?
No, it's in relation. It is separate from your notes, but it is in relation to your notes.
Oh, okay. Well, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about something relatively related to ZZT almost in a way, because we're talking about a classic role-playing game that is also primarily a game that did not use graphics. It used text characters, which is something ZZT does. ZZT, though, is not a roguelike, but it does remind me of today's topic, which is Rogue. It was brought to my attention by one of our listeners that we often talk about roguelikes. We often talk about games that we've been recently playing or games that are topics of the episode, and we describe them as roguelikes. However, I don't think we've ever talked about Rogue, and I did go back and I went through our episodes and I double checked, and I didn't see an episode called Rogue, so I'm going to assume we didn't talk about Rogue, which is surprising considering we've done 322 episodes and we've never talked in depth about one of the most defining classic games of all time, which is Rogue.
However, true to form, I do have a letter here from our producer, Doug, issued to us February 4th, 2020.
Oh, nice.
It was actually the first letter written by producer Doug, and he actually said that he couldn't believe that we were already at episode 10, and he was impressed with our ability to record episodes. And he said, let's rap about roguelike games. And he stated that it's a fair statement to say that Rogue, the game that we're going to be talking about today, paved the way for most action-adventure games that we know. Between that and the randomization brought around by the popular Dungeons & Dragons, I feel like we get to real dungeon crawlers and looters like Diablo from Rogue and roguelike games. And I responded to this letter written by our fair producer, and I said we're excited to be hitting these double digits. And I talked about how personally that I played more hybrid roguelikes versus straight up roguelikes, and that they definitely play a history in defining the type of RNG games that we have today. And I also corrected him, which was my first mistake for correcting the producer. But I said the first roguelike game was not Rogue, and it was in fact called Pettit 5, and that was followed up by D&D both inspired by Dungeons & Dragons. And I said we'll definitely get an episode and talk about them in the newer roguelike games that have been swarming the market since 2013. And I said consider it on the schedule, and I signed it. And you're telling me we have not done an episode on Rogue.
That I can tell. We've done one on Rogue Squadron.
He specifically wanted to talk about he wanted us to talk about rogues.
Well, that's great. Well, hey, producer Doug, we got to it eventually, and maybe in 5 or 6 years we'll get to Golden Sun. But Rogue is an interesting game. It's a game that is it's a dungeon crawling game. It is the game that coined the term roguelike. Now, Rogue would not be the first roguelike. In fact, there's an earlier game called Beneath Apple Manor, released for the Apple II, which has a lot of similarities to Rogue, including using procedural generation. But I think Rogue did it best, and also did it most notably, and became most famous for doing it. It's a game that was developed by a group of developers. Starting out, though, was a guy named Michael Toy, who grew up with a family that were not strangers to computers. His father was a nuclear scientist, and would often take Michael to his place of work, where he would get the chance to play games on the facility's mainframe, which sounds like a nightmare, bringing a child to the nuclear facility and letting him play video games on the nuclear computer. I'm happy that Michael didn't cause a catastrophe because he was playing games on a nuclear facility's computer, but one of those games that he did play on this mainframe was a text-based game called Star Trek from 1971 that we briefly talked about in our Star Trek episode. Michael wanted to make his own games. He would attempt to do so by programming on devices like the Sol 20, a microcomputer kit that was available on the market in 1976. He enrolled in UCSC, the University of California, Santa Cruz, and in the later part of the 1970s would start using their computers, a PDP-11 and then later updated to a VAX-11, to explore the ARPANET. We may have talked about it before, but the ARPANET, for those who aren't familiar, was a precursor to what is now the modern internet. It was a connected network of school computers that allowed people to share programs and data. And it was through the ARPANET that people would often share games and software with each other over the lovely, lovely speed of like a few bits per minute. But in any case, it was through the ARPANET that Michael was introduced to a game himself, Colossal Cave Adventure, and decided that the game that he wanted to make should be kind of similar to this one.
Yeah, if you did not grow up with ARPANET and you want to think about it, just think about Facebook when it was only open to college kids. That's what ARPANET was.
Yes, and also then get rid of all the visual.
Well, yeah.
It's mostly text.
If Facebook was open to only college kids and was also just words. It was when Michael was developing his game that he met Glenn Wichman, who was coincidentally also working on an adventure game. Wichman had enrolled at UCSC to study game design, though shifted to computer science as he wanted to develop a game that was similar to his favorite RPG, Dungeons & Dragons. Michael and Glenn would become close friends and move in together and begin combining their skills to create a game and level up their experience. One of the things that they immediately wanted to address in their video game was the lack of replayability in the adventure games that were popular at the time. Most of those games, you'd play through the story once, and that would be it. You would never play it again. And that's actually relatively true today with some adventure games. You play through the game once, and then you really don't need to pick it up again because you experience the story. And now, mind you, there's always that type of like, I paid $10 for this game. It gave me 10 hours of experience. I value my 10 hours of experience to be more than $10, and thus I had a good time. And you don't need it to be anything more. But they wanted to develop a game that could be played over and over again and to be a unique experience for everyone that played it. Glenn and Michael, in development of their game, became familiar with the Unix operating system. Unix was becoming one of the main operating systems across University of California's various schools and offered a programming library called Curses. This library made it so programmers could put text characters wherever they wanted in the terminal, and thus created rudimentary graphics. Because they were building the game out in terminals, it meant that they were limited to only ASCII characters, and so the @ symbol stood in for their character. So you played Mr. @ symbol as your character, and in order to represent empty spaces, there would be periods. The straight bracket and the hyphen symbol would be how you made walls. If you think about it, you can make a little box, right? And plus marks would be doors, and so on and so forth. To fix the problem with games not being replayable, they developed a way for dungeons to be randomized. The code would construct a dungeon and place the player character in a location. The way they did this was through procedural generation. Each level would essentially be generated on a grid, and rooms would vary in size and shape, with hallways connecting them. Items and monsters would be placed in random areas, and to make the game harder, they tried to make it so that the monsters got more intelligent the deeper you traveled into the dungeon, but ended up running into memory issues, so they just made it so that monsters had more health to make it more difficult. I think about the innovation that they were doing, and this was in still the 70s, right?
Yeah.
So they were creating a game in the 70s that could RNG dungeons, and so when people make games in the 26s and they think they're impressive because it RNGs dungeons, I say no.
One crucial element to the game is permadeath. Permadeath was implemented for a number of reasons. One was that Michael just didn't like the idea of a game being beaten just by learning the right sequence or steps. Even a game that is procedurally generated, he felt that, players could essentially just figure the game out. He wanted players to focus on their own ability, so that if you die, it was because you simply weren't prepared or focused enough. Originally, the game did not have any save functions, and playtesters complained about this. So, the two would add a save function to the game, but then found that playtesters were utilizing save files to beat areas that they were stuck on by saving just before doing something and then resetting the save if they died, aka save scumming, which is still something that people do today, including myself. To balance this, Glenn and Michael decided that you could still save your game. However, when you died, it would reload the game and delete your save file. So, yes, you can save, but the save does not last. So your character would not not be able to be restored if you died, thus being permanently dead. Now, with all this work on games, you may be asking yourself, well, when did they have time to do their homework? These were 2 college kids. They were enrolled in school. They should have probably been also working on their homework. Well, to answer your question, Michael didn't have time to do his homework and in fact got removed from school due to the fact that he had really bad grades. He would drop out of school and then take on a job at the University of California, Berkeley, and would be able to work in the computer lab. And he brought with him the entire source code for the game they were developing, which at that time was called Rogue. Glenn Wichman would work a little bit longer on Rogue at the UCSC campus, but ultimately would contact Michael and give him full creative control, as it was just too difficult to coordinate the changes between the two of them when one of them was in Santa Cruz and the other one was at Berkeley. This is the 70s. It is a little harder to contact someone, if the phone lines are busy or if you can't get to the payphone or you have to send a letter in the mail.
Or they're not home.
Sending files was obnoxious back then. You would have had to set up the modem and get everything going, and then it would take forever.
Or mail it.
So basically, Glenn said, "This was fun. I am done." It passed on the project to Michael fully. Michael, though, wasn't alone on the project, because when he arrived at UCB, he met Ken Arnold, who had already played Rogue and had gotten a chance to test it thanks to the distribution of the program that was going on through the ARPANET.
Ken had actually previously tried to make fixes to the game, largely because when he tried to play it over modem lines, it took forever to play due to the speed of screen refresh. However, he was never able to implement these fixes as the source code was not publicly available. But Michael was now at UCB, and conveniently, he had the source code. And Ken was also at UCB, and so together, they were able to work on improving the game's rendering and procedural generation. By November of 1980, Rogue had become more popular with UCB, and in fact, it would be included in a bundle of other games that included titles like Zork and Colossal Cave Adventure. That must have felt so good to have Rogue be bundled in with Zork and Colossal Cave Adventure, these games that they looked up to. Later, Rogue was included in a selection of games that spread across the ARPANET as part of a distribution of BSD 4.2, one of the Unix OS releases, which allowed other colleges to begin playing the game. When Michael and Ken eventually left UCB in 1984, they took with them the source code, though eventually the source code was made available in BSD 4.3. Michael would take on a job at Olivetti, the typewriter company, and in 1984, he would help them with the development of their own IBM OS. And while at Olivetti, he met John Lane, who was a system administrator who was familiar with Rogue, and wanted to port the game to the IBM PC. Michael liked the idea. Together, the two of them would create a company called AI Design and began to port the game.
What I love is that Michael's life is just coincidence of being
But it's not coincidence. And I was just going to say this, it's not coincidence, because you're going to say oh, it's just surprising that Michael is running into these guys. It's really coincidental. He just happens to run into these people. No. First of all, it's 1984. The people who are system administrators are a very particular breed of people.
They were.
90% of them were probably men. 90% of them were also probably nerdy. And 90% of them probably had played Rogue. I think it was more coincidental for John Lane to meet Michael versus Michael meeting John Lane.
Now, because the IBM PC had a larger font library than most terminals did, they were able to expand the graphics, quote unquote, such as replacing the main character's graphic from the @ symbol to a smiley face symbol. They also decided that they probably should change the names of some of the monsters and items in their game, Rogue, to avoid bumping into the lawyers over at TSR, as the original version of Rogue used a lot of copyrighted material from Dungeons & Dragons, including kobolds, which were copyrighted TSR. Kobolds became kestrels. So if you're ever playing Rogue and wondering what a kestrel is, it is, in fact, a kobold. But back when you were playing it on the mainframe, TSR was either unaware or didn't care enough to do anything. Which, to be fair, it wasn't making any money when it was on the mainframes.
And also, I think there was a period in time where TSR would benefit from almost any publicity.
They still would obviously want to protect their copyright.
Well, if it was making money, for sure.
Yes. Michael and John would begin distributing the IBM version of Rogue all by themselves. And they were able to just about break even in sales, reportedly. But the game really began to actually see sales when the company Epix came a-knockin' and got in touch and asked if John and Michael were interested in porting the game to other consoles. And they were. Michael would take on the lead development for the port to the Macintosh and would bring back Glenn Wichman.
Oh, from the top rope, it's Glenn Witchman.
Yeah, Glenn Witchman was asked to come back and work on Rogue to design the graphics, as he had graphic design experience, something that Michael and John did not have. Glenn would take on the development of the graphics for the Macintosh version and would be the lead developer for the Atari ST version of the game. And the game would also get ported to a bunch of other computers, the TRS-80 color computer, the Amiga, and so on and so on. And to break it down, the reason the game is able to be ported to so many places and to be pretty easy to get into is because it's fairly simple. The story itself is you play as a rogue. Maybe your name is just Rogue, but you're traveling into a dungeon to retrieve the Amulet of Yendor and return it to the surface.
Are you like a rogue, like a ne'er-do-well?
You're just like a guy. Like I think initially there was just the character's name, and then like people associated it with the class, like a rogue. But yeah, you're just a rogue who's going into.
If it's a tomb, then maybe you're just breaking into people's graves.
Yeah, I mean, you are breaking into a dungeon to steal an amulet from some dead dude.
Just because he says doesn't mean that he gave up his rights.
That's true. You start from the very top of the dungeon and you descend to the bottom, and then you return to the surface, and you do so in a top-down perspective where you control your character and you encounter various enemies. You can attack them with a weapon. There are various items you can use to heal, such as food or potions. When you die in the game, you die in real life. No, the game is permadeath though, so if you die in Rogue and you have to reset the game, that's it for your character's run. All the experience you got, all the the distance you've made in the dungeon is null and void. You have to reset from the beginning, which makes the game interesting and difficult, but also what really I think helps with making the game less frustrating because of this is the procedural generation. With the new dungeons that you get to explore, it does feel like a different game every time you play it, with the same graphics, but it does feel like things that you maybe expected or were thrown off by in your first run were different in the second run, and now you might have a little better experience with tackling things. And the game really does reward you with this by pushing you harder and harder with those harder enemies as you get deeper and deeper into the game. Now, Seth, how did Rogue do?
It's hard to say the exact numbers. Per some reports, Michael, John, Ken, and Glenn did not make much money from profits of the game, which would imply that it probably didn't sell well or they priced it poorly. The game also, when released by Epix, was ultimately considered a commercial flop, which means that it cost more than they made. It was a pretty niche title that was also only sold through software catalogs, so people weren't buying a cool game named Rogue off of a shelf. They were thumbing through a magazine and probably mailing in to get it, which is not always the best for a good throughput of items. Also, Epix, they weren't necessarily the best business savvy folks because they would also go bankrupt in 1989. Difficult to continue to sell your game after your publisher goes defunct, but it is undeniable that there were a lot of people that played it, and maybe even the right people that played it. Rogue would go on to inspire a number of people who would go on to build off and create other games that we love today. So I think part of the Rogue experience is that maybe not a lot of people played it, but maybe the right people played it. Be it the versions that were bouncing around ARPANET or the ports that got released for other systems like the Amstrad CPCs, ZX Spectrum, or Commodore 64. And at the time, the game was popular. Dragon issue 112. I think I actually own Dragon issue 112. Let me see. Hold on. Give me 1 second. In fact, I have issue 102, and I have issue 126.
Oh, okay. So no issue 112.
No 112. But in issue 112 for Dragon, they gave the Macintosh version of Rogue a 3.5 out of 5. Compute Magazine also gave the game a positive review for the Amiga version. So a critically acclaimed, but or at least well-reviewed game that didn't sell too well, possibly due to distribution and publisher going defunct. What Rogue did do was create and define a genre. It's thanks to Rogue that we refer to a game as either roguelike or roguelite. Games like NetHack or the Mystery Dungeon games, The Binding of Isaac, Spelunky, FTL Faster Than Light, or Hades are all games that owe something to Rogue, be it that there's randomized dungeons, procedural generation, or permadeath. There are hundreds of games, if not more, that utilize some form of gameplay similar to or inspired by Rogue, and that list, just like the game, is endless.
Yeah, it truly just goes on. Games take on a lot of influence from Rogue, be it the permadeath, be it the procedural generation,
Even
be
today,
it just being difficult. It's really interesting to see how that game has inspired so much and become such a ubiquitous term for something that a lot of people might not have played, at least nowadays. I think a lot of people played Rogue back in the day. I think a good amount of people played Rogue back in the day, especially thanks to its essentially free distribution through the ARPANET. But one of the reasons this topic came up is because I was talking to one of our listeners, and they said how they always heard something being described as a roguelike. Why is it called that? And I said to them, because it comes from the game Rogue, and it's something that is like Rogue. And they said, well, what's Rogue? And I said, yeah, great point. Rogue is available, though, on Steam for like $3 if you want to play it. And it's like the original version, the DOS version. I have that copy. I've played it. It's been one of my recently plays before, and it's a fantastic game. I love it. You could also definitely just play it probably through like a DOSBox thing if you have it. If you have Exo DOS, it is available there. It's not the terminal version. It's going to be the updated IBM PC version, but there's probably someone out there who has emulated the terminal version of Rogue. If you really want to like experience what it was like on a PDP-11 or something, I would say stick to the DOS version or one of the ports. There are also plenty of Rogue clones, like games that just literally ripped off Rogue at that time that were released, including for DOS. So it's really quite an endless mess of things. But Seth, do you have anything to end on with Rogue?
No, but if this is the episode that you always wanted, Producer Doug, here it is. Just let me go back to that. 6 years late.
Don't say we never do anything for you, Producer Doug.
That's right. So Golden Sun is slotted for 2032 by my accounts.
Yeah.
2032 will be when we'll be talking about Golden Sun.
That sounds about right. To get into our retro rewind, Seth had me play a game called 3D Body Adventure for MS-DOS. Developed by Knowledge Adventure, 3D Body Adventure is an educational title where you learn about the human body. There are in fact little videos where you can watch 3D images of the body, including actual 3D, where the screen goes, was not stereoptic, but with the like blue and red color split. So if you have 3D glasses, you can see a 3D body. But there are also games, so this is technically a game. There are some mini games that you can play. One of the games that I played was in fact a 3D like environment where you can wander around a hospital. Now, when I started this 3D environment, it told me I had to interview the patients, and I said, okay. So I walked around, and I couldn't find any patients. What I did find, though, was a room with a giant floating brain in it, and a room with a giant floating stomach in it, and pictures on the wall. And when I interacted with the pictures, it told me about these organs, and I said, these are not patients. At one point, I walked to a door that was labeled exit, and the game put me outside of the hospital in the woods. And I was like, why did they put this in? And I turned around to go back in, and it said, it is nighttime. The hospital's door is closed. You will need to go through the back entrance. So I had to walk around the hospital and go through the back door. And I said, why did they put this in? This seems very silly because there is nothing outside. In any case, it seems like a game that was really innovative back in 1994 when it was released. In 2026, it is a little less innovative, but still kind of neat. Do I think it holds up? Kinda. I don't know. I mean, there are probably better ways to learn about the human body. There are definitely better 3D games out there. But if you like this type of educational game where there's kind of this uncanny element to it, be it this like 3D environment you can explore, then yeah, I guess it does kind of hold up. If you like something like Sonic's Playhouse almost, where it has that like 3D environment you can explore, I could see why you might like 3D Body Adventure. It's probably definitely nostalgic for people who played it. I don't remember ever playing it, so it's not nostalgic for me. Next week, Seth, you can play a game that is a little nostalgic for me. That game is Mega Man X3 for the Super Nintendo.
Great. That sounds fun. A fun fact about Knowledge Adventure was that it was also went by another name, and that name was Jumpstart Games. And a fun fact about Jumpstart Games is they owned Neopets for a little while.
A real fun fact about Knowledge Adventure is we did a whole episode on them back in 197 where we talked about the Spider-Man cartoon maker.
That's right. Knowledge Adventure. Creating some bangers like Spider-Man Cartoon Maker and some other games like 3D Body Adventure. Now, for my Retro Rewind, Zach had me play The Quest, which is a graphic fantasy text adventure game that was released in 1983 by Penguin Software, designed originally for the Apple II and would go on to get ported to the Atari 8-bit computers, or as I like to write in my notes, Atari 8-butt, Commodore 64, Mac, and the version that Zach had me play, MS-DOS. It takes place in the Middle Ages in a kingdom of Balmia, and you play as a role of an advisor who hangs out with the champion, and his name is Gorn. And you're just kind of like, you're the new king's advisor. You show up and you're like in the king's throne room, and then you got to tell Gorn everything to do. So you're just kind of like, you're advising, but you're not really advising the king. You're just advising Gorn, because apparently he's just like kind of a dummy. And you have to explore the world with Gorn. And I think you get a party of adventurers. It's all text based, and you can have graphics, but the graphics are pictures, which I guess all graphics are, but these pictures are static. And there's text. It's a lot of text. It's just a lot of text. It's just like a chapter book. It's also a text parser game, so you have to type in things, and the game has to interpret what you were saying, and sometimes it doesn't interpret it correctly. Or, if you're like me, and you just ask it a bunch of times, punch that guy. And then it says, I don't want to get into a fight right now. And I say, punch him. And then they say, I don't want to get in a fight right now. And that's kind of how my game went. As a text-based adventure game, I think that it holds up within the genre of text-based adventure games, because you could still find joy with them if you like reading a lot, like a book. It holds up if you compare it to a chapter book. Does it hold up if you compare it to a first-person shooter? Well, if you want to play a first-person shooter, no, probably not, because it's like a chapter book. However, it's got a good story, very classic fantasy, but don't expect that story is going to save you from reading a chapter book. Also, you have to wander around collecting things, and if you wander around too much in the wrong direction, you will die. This game is from the 80s, and they didn't particularly care about you having a good time. They just didn't care. They just were making a game. Next week, Zach, you could play Chrono Master for the MS-DOS.
Great, I will. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you've ever played Rogue or have any memories playing Rogue or using the ARPANET back in the day, let us know by emailing us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can find us wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on Patreon. Look us up. We're available on social media, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. We're also available on YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe. With that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Right.